Welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a truly fascinating piece of textual architecture. We're going to explore Surah 66 At-Tahrim. And what's absolutely remarkable about Surah 66 At-Tahrim is how it masterfully takes a single, seemingly isolated domestic dispute and uses it to completely dismantle the illusion of inherited salvation. It basically shows us that absolute accountability is a strictly individual state. So let's dive right into this.
To grasp how this highly organized architecture works, we're going to follow this clear path. First, the rules of systemic flexibility. Second, guarding the microsystem. Third, the proximity paradox. And finally, perfecting the self-correction. Now, Surah 66 At-Tahrim doesn't just, jump straight into abstract philosophy. Instead, it uses this brilliant zoom-out arc. It begins with step 1, a very specific household case. Then expands out to step 2, a universal household principle, and finally scales all the way up to step 3, universal individual accountability. It's this incredibly logical progression from the hyperspecific to the universal. So, starting with section 1, rules of systemic flexibility. We kick things off with the catalyst. Surah 66 Al-Tahrim opens by addressing a domestic regulatory matter where a leadership figure actually restricts something that was completely allowed, basically just to appease his household. And in response, Surah 66 introduces this concept called tahlil. Tahlil is the system's built-in mechanism for release from self-imposed restrictions. And this is huge, right? Because it perfectly illustrates that the overriding systemic order is actually a self-correcting framework. It's not rigidly punishing. It proves that we humans simply cannot declare functional prohibitions on what the system has already fundamentally permitted. It sets up a really fascinating linguistic contrast. On one side, we have HRM, which signifies restriction or human-imposed prohibition. And on the flip side, we have HLL, which literally translates to untying knots or systemic allowance. By putting these two side by side, Surah 66 At-Tahrim is proving that when we humans impose arbitrary prohibitions on ourselves, we aren't actually enhancing our alignment with the truth at all. We're actually disrupting structural law. You just can't alter the boundaries of HLL without systemic authorization. The real takeaway here is perfectly captured in this verse. The system has already established for you a release mechanism for your binding commitments. Now, what's super interesting is that the Arabic word used for commitments here shares the exact same root as the word for verification and security, iman. The system is actively designed to correct our human-imposed rigidity back to its actual flexible boundaries. Basically, the system gives you a way to untie the knot when you've mistakenly bound yourself up. All right, moving right along to section 2, guarding the microsystem. Let's see how this builds from that specific marital case we just talked about into a universal command for the household as a self-governing cell. Once Surah 66 At-Tahrim resolves the domestic issue, it immediately shifts gears. It turns to address everyone carrying conviction and introduces the imperative qu anfusakum. This comes from the root QWM, meaning to actively maintain and establish an upright operational state. Surah 66 is commanding us to establish a protective barrier around ourselves and our domestic network. And this proves that household maintenance is not just some passive stance where you cross your fingers and hope for the best. No, it is a direct, non-delegable obligation of active structural upkeep. You literally have to build the guardrails yourself. Surah 66, At-Tahrim, grounds this whole theory in a pretty stark reality. It says, guard yourselves and your household from a fire whose fuel is people and stones, overseen by rigorous, unyielding operatives. It is intensely emphasizing the immediate danger of catastrophic systemic failure if the microsystem, meaning your household, is left completely unguarded. And this brilliantly illustrates something really profound about the nature of this consequence. The fire, or nar, isn't just some arbitrary future punishment. In plain functional terms, it is a present state of consuming chaos. Think of it like a machine just burning itself out because all the gears are misaligned. And the fuel for this fire? It's people and their own misaligned actions hardened into stones. The cause is entirely self-generated. It's the direct consequence of structural misalignment. Your own misaligned actions are the literal fuel for the chaos you experience.
That brings us to section 3, the proximity paradox. We've reached the real climax of Surah 66 At-Tahrim here, and it forces us to ask, does closeness to righteousness actually guarantee your safety? If you're married to someone who is perfectly structurally aligned, or if you live in a really well-maintained household, does that automatically protect you? Well, Surah 66 uses a profound paradox to absolutely shatter the illusion that you can somehow borrow someone else's structural alignment.
To really understand this paradox, we need to correctly define kufr. Kufr is not just passive unbelief. It is the active concealment or deliberate rejection of evident reality. And most importantly for this explainer, it is an entirely nafs level or individual level condition. It is completely independent of your marital status or social proximity. You can literally be standing shoulder to shoulder with the truth and still actively conceal it.
Surah 66 At-Tahrim sets up these incredible side-by-side historical data points to prove this. On one hand, we have the wives of Nuh and Lut. They lived with highly aligned prophets. They were under the exact same roof as prime historical exemplars of systemic maintenance. And yet, it resulted in their ultimate failure and betrayal. Proximity to a righteous operative gave them zero unearned protection. But then, on the flip side, we have the exact opposite scenario with the wife of Firaun. She was married to a literal tyrant, living in direct, daily proximity to severe systemic corruption. Yet, she achieved ultimate alignment and verification. Being close to a tyrant conferred zero unearned liability on her.
So, Surah 66 At-Tahrim conclusively proves a really hard truth. Absolute individual accountability, alignment, iman, and concealment, kafir, are strictly individual, uninheritable states. The ultimate reality strips away all your social scaffolding. It doesn't matter who your spouse is, who your parents are, or what community you happen to belong to. The ultimate manifestation of reality filters every single soul strictly by its own functional data points, no exceptions.
Let's wrap things up with Section 4, Perfecting the Self-Correction.
Okay, so since we know we absolutely cannot rely on our proximity to others and we stand entirely alone, how does the system reset? Because the responsibility rests entirely on our own shoulders, Surah 66 At-Tahrim introduces Tawbah Nasuha. This is the system's ultimate self-correction protocol. The root for Tawbah means to return to a prior operational alignment, and the word Nasuha comes from a root denoting sincere, structural soundness. Put them together, and they form an intensified course correction that gets your house completely back in order.
But here is the critical distinction you have to understand. Just feeling sorry isn't enough. Tawbah Nasuha isn't just sending a quick apology text. It is a technically complete structural course correction. It requires you to actively fix the misalignment in your life. It demands internally verified alignment and deliberate execution to avoid that catastrophic systemic collapse, that self-generated fire we were talking about earlier. You literally have to go in and rebuild the guardrails yourself. So we end our explainer of Surah 66 At-Tahrim with this question. If your ultimate alignment cannot be borrowed from anyone around you, not your family, not your leaders, absolutely no one, what structural corrections are you making to your own microsystem today? Since you stand entirely alone in your accountability, how secure is the architecture of your own soul? Let that sink in for a bit. Thanks so much for exploring Surah 66 At-Tahrim with me today, and remember to keep questioning the structures around you.